The world holds its breath. In the cradle of the Mediterranean, a people rise from dust and stone, from shepherds and farmers to rulers of a continent. What began as a single settlement on the banks of the Tiber was destined to become a force unlike any the earth had ever seen. Rome, a name that would echo through the corridors of time, forged not in comfort, but in conquest, discipline, and vision. The story of the empire does not begin with emperors draped in purple, nor with marble palaces gleaming under the sun. It begins in the restless heart of a republic, a city struggling to define its power, reaching beyond its borders, hungering for greatness. This hunger would drive them to clash with mighty Carthage, to march across foreign seas, and to dream of an empire long before the word had meaning. Rome was not born a giant. For centuries it was a republic, a state that prided itself on its institutions, its senate, and its citizens who carried the weight of their city's destiny. But ambition burned in Rome's veins. After securing the Italian peninsula, the Republic turned outward, locking horns with the great powers of the Mediterranean. The Punic Wars were no ordinary conflicts. They were struggles that tested Rome's endurance and revealed its relentless will. Hannibal's elephants stormed across the Alps, and for a moment the city trembled, but Rome never surrendered. Battle after battle, campaign after campaign, it endured until Carthage lay in ruins, its ashes scattered by Roman hands. From that day, the Mediterranean would begin to be called Mare Nostrum. Our sea victory bred more than pride. It brought new lands, new wealth, and new challenges. Rome expanded into Spain, Greece, North Africa, and beyond. With each conquest, the Republic became less of a city-state and more of a sprawling dominion. Yet with growth came fracture. The very system that had once safeguarded liberty began to strain under the weight of empire. Senators fought not for Rome, but for themselves. Generals commanded armies more loyal to their name than to the Republic. It was in this turmoil that towering figures emerged, men who would bend the Republic's laws and traditions until they broke. Julius Caesar, the general who conquered Gaul, marched across the Rubicon and declared that the old order could no longer contain Rome's destiny. His victory over Pompey made him master of the Republic, but his assassination revealed how divided the city had become. The Senate struck him down, yet in doing so unleashed more chaos than they contained. From the blood of civil war rose Octavian, Caesar's heir. Ruthless, calculating, and determined, he crushed his rivals, including the mighty Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium. Egypt fell, and with it the last obstacle to absolute power. In 27 bowed before him, granting him titles of honor and command. He took the name Augustus, revered, exalted, and with it the Republic quietly gave way to empire. This was the moment the world changed. No longer would Rome be guided by councils and senates alone. Now it would be ruled by emperors, men who held in their grasp the fate of millions. The Republic had died, but from its ashes the Roman Empire was born. The storm had passed. From the wreckage of civil war, a new order emerged. Rome, once torn apart by rival ambitions, now stood under the steady hand of one man, Augustus. With him the world witnessed the dawn of an age unlike any before. An empire wrapped not only in conquest, but in peace, prosperity, and glory. For centuries, men had fought for power in the name of the Republic, but Augustus cloaked his rule in the language of tradition. He called himself Princeps, the first among equals, not a king, for the Romans despised kings. Yet beneath the veil of modesty, he wielded absolute control. With quiet genius, he secured the loyalty of the legions, restored order to the provinces, and filled Rome with monuments that declared the greatness of his reign. This was not mere rule. It was the birth of the Pax Romana. 2 centuries of relative peace in which Rome's shadow stretched from the misty forests of Britain to the deserts of Arabia. Trade flourished along roads that cut across mountains and rivers. Aqueducts carried water into cities of marble. Law bound together peoples of different tongues, faiths, and traditions. And for the first time in history, a vast swath of humanity lived under one system, one authority, one empire. And the Mediterranean world was no longer a battleground of states, it was a Roman lake. Yet the greatness of the empire was not in stone alone. but in the men who carried its legacy. After Augustus came Tiberius, stern and watchful. Caligula, remembered for madness. Claudius, underestimated yet wise. And Nero, whose excesses lit both candles and flames of ruin. Their reigns revealed the fragility of dynastic succession, for power, once tasted, often bred corruption. And yet Rome endured. When Nero's suicide hurled the empire into chaos, 4 men in a single year claimed the purple. Civil war threatened to unravel Augustus' dream, but from the ashes arose Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty. He and his sons brought stability, built monuments like the Colosseum, and restored the empire's footing. Still, the true golden glow would come with the emperors who followed. Men remembered not for tyranny, but for wisdom. Nerva, the elder statesman, began a tradition of adopting capable heirs rather than relying solely on bloodlines. From him came Trajan, the soldier, emperor who expanded Rome to its greatest territorial reach, conquering Dacia and pushing into the east. Then Hadrian, the traveller and builder, who drew the empire's limits and fortified its frontiers with walls that still scar the earth today. Antoninus Pius followed, a ruler of peace, whose reign was marked not by conquest but by justice and calm. And finally, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, who balanced the weight of the crown with meditations on virtue, duty, and the fleeting nature of life. Historians call them the 5 good emperors, leaders who guided Rome with wisdom and restraint, who embodied what empire could be at its best. Under them, Rome reached the height of its power, wealth, and cultural brilliance. To live in their time was to witness the world as if bathed in gold. And yet, as history so often warns, even golden ages are not eternal. For in the reign of Marcus Aurelius' son, Commodus, the cracks began to spread, and the kingdom of gold would slowly turn to iron. The empire stood at its zenith, its borders stretching farther than any before. But golden ages are fragile things, and in the shadow of greatness decline often stirs unseen. With the death of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher on the throne, Rome passed into the hands of his son, Commodus, and with him the slow unravelling began. Commodus was not forged in the same iron discipline as his father. While Marcus Aurelius had wrestled with philosophy and duty, Commodus craved spectacle and ease. He dressed as a gladiator, fighting in the arena, declaring himself the living Hercules. The dignity of Rome was cheapened, the authority of the throne mocked. And when he fell to assassination, the empire was plunged into chaos. The year 193 AD became known as the year of the 5 emperors. Ambitious generals marched their armies against one another, the empire itself conquered. Out of this strife rose Septimius Severus, founder of the Severan dynasty, who restored order with ruthless strength. But his legacy was one of militarization. Emperors now relied more on the loyalty of soldiers than the institutions of state. Rome became less a republic of laws, more a barracks held together by the sword. The Severan dynasty did not last long. Intrigue, assassination, and weakness plagued its rulers. In 212, Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to all freeborn men across the empire, a gesture of unity, yet also a desperate attempt to raise more taxes and soldiers. Within decades, the empire descended into the crisis of the 3rd century. A storm of invasions, rebellions, economic collapse, and plague. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, many murdered by their own troops. In 50 years, nearly 30 emperors would claim the purple, most of them ending in blood. From the north, Germanic tribes pressed upon the frontiers. From the east, the Persians struck deep into Roman lands, even capturing a Roman emperor alive. Cities were sacked, trade faltered, currency lost its value. Once proud Rome seemed to stagger on its knees, a colossus crumbling under its own weight. For many, it appeared the empire had reached its end. And yet, Rome endured. Even in chaos, there were flashes of greatness. The soldier emperor Aurelian reunited the fractured realms, defeating breakaway empires in the east and west, restoring the empire's unity. He was hailed as Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world, but it would take another figure decades later to bring lasting stability. Rising from humble origins, he seized the throne in 284 and reshaped the empire itself. He abandoned the old republican mask of Augustus, no longer first among equals, but dominus, master, lord of all. The emperor was no longer a citizen in command. He was a distant sovereign, draped in majesty, to be obeyed without question. To strengthen Rome, Diocletian divided power. He created the Tetrarchy, rule of 4, with 2 senior emperors and 2 juniors, each governing a section of the vast empire. Administration became more efficient, frontiers better guarded, and for a time stability returned. Yet his reign was not without shadows. Seeking unity through religion, he unleashed the Great Persecution, Rome's last and fiercest attempt to eradicate Christianity. But in Diocletian's reforms lay the seeds of survival. Though the empire had nearly collapsed, his new order transformed it from a crumbling republic empire into a true monarchy, one that would last in the East for over 1,000 years more. The kingdom of gold had long passed, but Rome, scarred and reshaped, stood once more. Stronger in some ways, harsher in others. And soon, a new faith once hunted would rise to define its destiny. The reforms of Diocletian had bought Rome time. The empire, battered but unbroken, was reshaped into a monarchy of order and discipline. Yet no system of power, no matter how carefully built, could silence the ambitions of men. When Diocletian laid down his crown in a rare act of voluntary abdication, the balance shattered. Once again, generals marched, civil wars raged, and the empire trembled on the edge of ruin. From this storm rose one man whose name would forever change the fate of Rome, Constantine. Brilliant, ruthless, and unyielding, he crushed his rivals one by one until the empire bent to his will. In 312, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, legend tells that he marched under a new symbol, the sign of the cross, a vision that declared, "In this sign you shall conquer." Against the old gods of Rome, a new faith had taken root, and now it had found its champion. Constantine's victory was more than political, it was spiritual. He became the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity, ending centuries of persecution and elevated the faith from hunted sect to imperial creed. He convened councils, built churches, and laid the foundation of a Christian empire. No longer would Jupiter, Mars, or Apollo command the devotion of Rome. The gods of old began to fade, replaced by a single god whose message spread across provinces and frontiers. But Constantine's vision extended beyond religion. He looked east to a city by the Bosporus, Byzantium. There he built a new capital, a city of marble and gold, crowned with walls and domes. Constantinople. Positioned between Europe and Asia, it was to be not only a fortress, but a beacon of Roman strength. Rome itself, the eternal city, was left in shadow. Power had shifted, and with it, the heart of empire. Yet not all shared Constantine's devotion. For a brief moment, under the Emperor Julian, Rome tried to turn back the clock to restore the rights of the ancient gods. But his reign was short, and the tide could not be reversed. The emperors who followed were Christians, and their rule bound the faith to the fate of the empire. In the later decades, the dynasty of Valentinian and Theodosius carried forward this transformation. The empire was too vast, too complex for one man to govern, and so it was divided. East and West, 2 thrones ruling one realm. It was a practical solution, yet also a dangerous one, for unity was fragile and divisions deep. Theodosius I, the last emperor to rule both halves, sealed the empire's new identity. In 380, he declared Christianity the official religion of Rome. Temples to the old gods were closed, sacrifices forbidden, and the faith of Christ stood as the empire's unshakable foundation. When Theodosius died in 395, his sons inherited East and West. Never again would the empire be whole. Thus began a new chapter. In the East, Constantinople rose in splendor, shielded by strong walls and rich trade. In the West, Rome staggered, its lands beset by invasions, its strength slowly bleeding away. The empire, once united and invincible, was now 2 worlds, 2 destinies, walking the same path toward very different ends. The empire was divided, East and West, 2 crowns bound by tradition, but separated by fate. In the East, Constantinople gleamed, its walls unbroken, its riches flowing from the crossroads of continents. In the West, however, shadows lengthened. Rome, the city that had once commanded the world, now stood vulnerable, besieged not by rivals of equal might, but by waves of migrating peoples, drawn to the empire's wealth and weakened borders. In the early 5th century, the Germanic tribes surged across the frontiers. The Visigoths, once allies, turned against their host, sacking the Eternal City in 410. The first time in 800 years Rome had fallen to foreign hands. To the Roman mind, it was unthinkable. The very heart of civilization laid bare, yet it was not the end, only a sign of worse to come. Vandals carved kingdoms in North Africa. Franks spread into Gaul. Ostrogoths pushed into Italy. The empire's armies, stretched thin and plagued by disunity, could not contain the flood. The West became a patchwork of crumbling provinces and independent warlords. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, many little more than pawns of barbarian generals. Taxes dwindled, cities decayed, roads fell silent. The grandeur of the Colosseum, the forums, the aqueducts, they stood as monuments to a past Rome could no longer sustain. By 476, the illusion of empire was broken. Romulus Augustus, a boy emperor with a name both noble and tragic, was forced to abdicate to the Germanic warlord Ossa. The Western Roman Empire was no more, and yet Rome did not truly die, for in the east Constantinople endured. Its walls, towering and impregnable, turned aside waves of invaders. Its scholars preserved the wisdom of Greece and Rome. Its emperors, heirs to Augustus in name and law, ruled lands from the Balkans to Anatolia. While the West descended into what later generations would call the Dark Ages, the East thrived as the Byzantine Empire. Greek in tongue, Christian in faith, but Roman in identity, it carried the torch of empire for nearly 1,000 more years. Through centuries of triumph and trial, it resisted Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and Crusaders. Emperors rose as warriors and as patrons of art, raising domes like that of Hagia Sophia, where sunlight seemed to touch heaven itself. Yet even the might of Byzantium could not withstand the relentless tide of history. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, its last emperor, Constantine, extored in hand upon the walls. With him, the final echo of the Roman Empire was silenced. From the Tiber to the Bosporus, from the Golden Age to the Age of Ruin, the story of Rome is not merely one of conquest and collapse. It is the story of humanity's hunger for power, its brilliance in creation, and its inevitability of decline. Rome's empire ended, but its legacy endures, in law, in language, in faith, and in the very bones of the cities we walk today. For though the empire's fallen, the idea of Rome will never die.